It begins in a room no bigger than a cheap motel suite, the kind of place chosen precisely because it promises nothing memorable. The curtains are drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon sunday. A table sits at the center, its surface polished just enough to catch the faint glow of a flickering lamp. On one side, a man known across America as the face of unrelenting authority leans back in his chair. Tom Homan, the swaggering former head of ICE, the man who styled himself as the defender of law and order. On the other side, two men sit quietly, their eyes steady, their movements deliberate. They are not who they seem. A briefcase rests on the table. For a long, tense moment, no one speaks. The hum of the air conditioner fills the silence, heavy and oppressive. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, one of the men flicks open the clasps. The lid creaks back to reveal stacks of crisp bills, $50,000 in cash. The kind of money that speaks louder than words. The kind of money that tests whether a man's loyalty is to his country or to himself. Homan leans forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the cash. He does not ask where it came from. He does not ask why it has been offered. His silence speaks volumes. His fingers brush the edge of the bills, and in that moment, the line between enforcer and betrayer blurs. Hidden microphones capture every breath, every nervous shuffle, every subtle acknowledgement. To the agents across the table, this is the culmination of weeks of planning, of carefully laid traps designed to expose corruption at the highest levels. They have the footage. They have the evidence. They have the moment that should have shaken the foundations of American law enforcement. And yet, the American people would never see it. The public would never hear about the briefcase, the bills, the silence heavy with betrayal. Because the machinery of power was already at work, grinding in the shadows, ready to smother the truth before it could breathe. The narrator's voice cuts like a blade. But the world would never hear about what happened next, because Trump's Department of Justice buried it. The lamp flickers once more, the briefcase snaps shut, and with it, the chance for accountability disappears into darkness. And this, as you will soon discover, was only the beginning. Tom Homan was no ordinary bureaucrat. To many Americans, he was the iron face of the Trump administration's immigration machine, the man who boasted on television about raids at dawn, who defended separating families at the border with a smirk that suggested he believed compassion was weakness. He called himself tough, unapologetic, a soldier in the fight to protect America. His fans painted him as a patriot. His critics saw something else entirely, a man who wielded power not with justice, but with cruelty. And yet, in the halls of Washington, he was treated with deference. Senators welcomed his testimony. Conservative news shows gave him a platform night after night, casting him as the no-nonsense defender of American values. To Trump's base, Homan was a hero. To Trump himself, he was more than an ally. He was a symbol of loyalty, a man who embodied the administration's promise to be ruthless in the name of order. But what happens when the enforcer of order takes money slipped across a table? What does it mean when the man entrusted with the rule of law is caught in the very act of betraying it? The sting was not just about a transaction. It was about exposing the cracks in the very foundation of justice. Homan had built his reputation on fear, on the claim that lawbreakers must be punished without mercy. He branded undocumented immigrants as criminals, insisting the law was sacred. Yet here he was, caught in a room with 50,000 reasons to forget his oath. If a man like Homan could be bought, then the entire image of law and order crumbled. Because this wasn't just about one official, it was about the system itself. The FBI didn't target him by accident. They targeted him because whispers had already reached Washington that his power had become something dangerous. This sting was meant to reveal not only one man's corruption, but the culture of impunity at the highest levels. And here lies the moral stakes. The law is supposed to be blind. The law is supposed to be stronger than any man, stronger than any political machine. But when those who enforce it can be swayed by envelopes of cash, what does justice even mean? It means nothing. It becomes a costume, a performance meant to intimidate the powerless while shielding the powerful. For the immigrant families who watched Homan tear lives apart on television, the idea that he himself might be on the take was more than hypocrisy. It was a bitter confirmation. It showed that cruelty was never about protecting America. It was about power. And when power can be bought, dignity has no place at the table. This case should have been explosive. It should have been front-page headlines, congressional hearings, a reckoning that shook the Trump administration to its core. The evidence was real. The recordings were made. The money was counted. The truth was captured in plain sight. But the truth is dangerous when it threatens those in charge, and soon the quiet gears of Trump's Justice Department began to turn. Instead of preparing an indictment, instead of pursuing justice, powerful hands reached into the case files and smothered them. The sting would be buried, the scandal erased, and Tom Homan would walk away untouched. Yet the story doesn't end with silence. Because the cover-up did more than protect one man. The cover-up would reveal something even darker. Section. To understand why the FBI sting against Tom Homan mattered, you have to understand the mythology he built around himself and the fear he left in his wake. For years, Homan branded himself as America's tough cop. He rose through the ranks of immigration enforcement, carving out a reputation as the man who would go further, push harder, and hit faster than anyone else. He relished being seen as merciless. His catchphrases echoed across conservative media. If you're in the country illegally, you should be afraid. He didn't soften the message, he sharpened it. He wanted mothers, fathers, and children to tremble at the thought of his raids. The cameras loved him. He knew it. Standing at podiums, squaring his shoulders like a soldier at war, Homan delivered his speeches with the cadence of a man who believed he was America's shield. Yet behind the bravado, his legacy was written in pain. Families torn apart, homes raided in the dead of night, children left crying on doorsteps. He defended every action, claiming it was the law. To critics, he was the embodiment of cruelty, not protecting America, but punishing those who dreamed of becoming part of it. This was the law and order mask he wore, and he wore it proudly. But masks are fragile. And the sting revealed the truth. The man who demanded obedience to the law was willing to bend it for himself. $50,000 on a table exposed what his speeches concealed. That order to him was not a principle, but a tool. One he could weaponize against the powerless and abandon when it threatened his own gain. The hypocrisy was staggering. Here was the man who thundered that immigrants must follow the rules, caught in silence when faced with dirty cash. Here was the man who bragged on Fox News that no one is above the law, allegedly stepping over that very line without hesitation. To millions of Americans who had listened to his chest-thumping declarations, the revelation struck like a betrayal. He wasn't the law's defender, he was its violator. And arrogance? Homan carried it like armor. He once told, "But arrogance is a dangerous currency. It blinds. It convinces men like Homan that they are invincible, that they can cash in loyalty, power, and fear forever without consequence." The FBI sting shattered that illusion, if only for a moment. The footage showed not a fearless warrior of justice, but a man cornered, willing to take what he claimed to despise. It stripped away the myth and revealed the man beneath one who was not guided by principle, but by greed. And yet, instead of falling, he was protected. The very system he claimed to defend stepped in to shield him. That contradiction is the beating heart of this story. Because Homan wasn't just one man caught in an ugly transaction. He was a symbol of what happens when cruelty becomes policy, when arrogance is mistaken for strength, and when corruption hides behind the flag. Every villain has a backstory, and Homan's is written in contradictions. He built his career on fear while claiming it was law. He preached justice while allegedly pocketing cash. He demanded accountability for others while escaping it himself. In the drama of America's struggle over truth and power, he is the character who seemed unstoppable, the villain whose rise was fueled by bluster and brutality. But villains rarely escape exposure forever. The FBI sting was meant to be his reckoning, the moment when the curtain fell and the world saw the hypocrisy for what it was. That reckoning was stolen, buried by the Trump DOJ. Still, The evidence remains, like a ghost, whispering of the truth that power tried to kill. Because the story of Tom Homan is not only about what he did in the light, it's about what he tried to hide in the shadows. And as history shows us, shadows don't last. They fade, they thin, and eventually the light breaks through. And in that light, the truth of Tom Homan's corruption was never just about him. It was about the system that chose to protect him. But if this is the villain's story, who stands on the other side? Who dared to play hero in the face of such power? That answer lies in the agents who set the sting, the ones who risked everything to hold him accountable until the system turned on them too. Long before the sting, before the briefcase slid across the table, there were men and women inside the FBI who saw something they could not ignore. These were not paper pushers or ladder climbers. They were investigators who believed in the oath they had taken that justice was blind, that no one was above the law. For them, this wasn't politics, it was principle, and principle has a weight all its own. The idea began as a whisper in the Bureau's hallways. Homan's name had floated through circles of concern, not as a hero, not as the so-called tough cop the public knew, but as a question mark. Whispers of favors, rumors of money, suggestions that the man who demanded absolute obedience to the law might not live by the law himself. For most, it was too dangerous to even contemplate. But for a small team of undercover agents, it was fuel. They decided the truth had to be tested. That decision carried a cost. Going after someone like Homan was not the same as chasing a cartel boss or a street-level trafficker. This was a man wired into the highest corridors of power. He had the ear of the president, the loyalty of the conservative press, and the machinery of the Department of Homeland Security at his back. Taking that risk was like walking into a storm with no umbrella, knowing the lightning might strike you before you even reached your target. Still, they pressed forward. They built their cover stories with painstaking care, every conversation rehearsed, every move calibrated. They lived double lives for months at home. They were parents and spouses, trying to keep their families unaware of the danger. On the job, they were operatives chasing a ghost of corruption, trying to bait a man who thought himself untouchable. They met in dim offices after hours, reviewing recordings, polishing their approach, aware that a single slip of the tongue could unravel it all. And beneath all the procedure, there was something deeper, moral drive. They weren't chasing Homan for headlines. They were doing it because they believed that if the enforcers of the law could be bought, then the law itself meant nothing. They believed their country demanded better than that. Each late night of preparation, each fake phone call, each coded meeting was powered not by orders from above, but by conscience. Courage doesn't announce itself in grand gestures. It lives in the quiet decisions to keep going when fear whispers stop. These agents carried that kind of courage. They knew their careers were on the line. They knew failure could mean disgrace, transfer, even blacklisting. But they also knew that if they didn't try, if they didn't put themselves in the line of fire, then men like Homan would walk unchecked, cloaked in authority while rotting the system from within. The sting itself was their masterpiece of patience. The hotel room chosen with precision. The cameras hidden in vents and lamps. The briefcase prepared with exact bills, marked and tracked. Every detail mapped out, every contingency considered. On the surface, it looked like a simple handoff. But to the agents behind it, it was the culmination of months of stress, secrecy, and relentless focus. When Homan leaned in, when the money slid into his reach, time slowed. This was the moment they had built toward, the moment they hoped would shatter his mask forever. And for a heartbeat, it seemed like justice had won. They had him. The footage was there, the evidence undeniable. But they also knew the second truth of Washington. Justice doesn't end when the evidence is collected. Justice depends on who controls the evidence. And these agents, brave as they were, would soon discover that no preparation, no moral drive, no courage could shield them from politics. Because what they didn't yet know was that their work was already doomed. Before the ink on their reports dried, before the tapes were even logged, decisions were being made far above their heads. They had put their careers on the line to expose corruption, only to find that the system itself was ready to smother their discovery. In the days after the sting, as they filed the paperwork, cataloged the evidence, and prepared the case for prosecution, there was still hope. They still believed in the machine of justice.
But whispers began to circulate. Whispers of calls from the DOJ, whispers of files being sealed, whispers of pressure coming from the highest office in the land. For agents who had given everything, it was like watching a fire they had lit for truth be drowned in cold water. They had risked their reputations, their futures, even their safety. And now, the system they had served faithfully was turning against them, not because they had failed, but because they had succeeded. That's the tragedy and the inspiration of their story. They are the forgotten heroes, the ones who dared to prove that power could be held accountable. They may never be celebrated. On cable news, their names may never be known to the public. But in the shadows of that sting operation, they embodied the very essence of justice, courage without guarantee, sacrifice without recognition, and yet their victory was stolen. Not by Homan himself, but by something bigger, darker, and more insidious, because the real cover-up was only beginning. The days after the sting should have been triumphant. The agents had captured the moment. The briefcase sliding across the table, Homan's hand lingering just long enough for the cameras to see. It was clean. It was undeniable. It was the kind of evidence that, in any normal world, would end a career overnight, and yet in Washington, nothing is ever that simple. The FBI team doubled down. They arranged follow-up meetings, kept the wire hot, tracked the signals. Each encounter was logged, each bill accounted for. They weren't chasing rumor anymore. They had the man himself tied to dirty money, tethered to betrayal. Every tape they gathered, every note they filed, added weight to the case. Inside the bureau, whispers hardened into certainty. An indictment was coming. People spoke in low tones about how big this was. Not just an ICE director, not just a Trump loyalist, but a man who had built his reputation on law and order now caught breaking the very code he enforced. It was scandal at the highest level, the kind of moment that could shake institutions. But as the files moved toward the Department of Justice, the air grew heavy, meetings became hushed, memos slowed down. A chill crept through the chain of command. Agents who once walked the halls with cautious pride now felt eyes on their backs. The question was no longer if charges would be filed, but if they would even be allowed. Within DOJ, the conflict was sharp, almost gladiatorial. Some argued the case was airtight. Evidence like this was a prosecutor's dream, a slam dunk. To bury it would be to betray the very oath they had sworn, but others were less convinced, or perhaps more afraid. Bringing charges against Tom Homan meant igniting a firestorm. It meant crossing Trump, and to cross Trump's circle was to risk annihilation. Meanwhile, the political noise grew deafening. Word of the probe began to leak in fragments, fueling a toxic battlefield of rhetoric. Conservative pundits thundered about the deep state. They painted the FBI agents as saboteurs, shadowy operatives, hell-bent on death, taking down Trump's most loyal enforcers. To them, it was proof of a government conspiracy, a witch hunt in the making. On the other side, critics of Homan watched in stunned anticipation. They pointed to his public arrogance, his chest-thumping speeches about immigrants, his calls for harsher raids. If this man is dirty, they argued, it's not just hypocrisy, it's rot at the core of American justice. Social media boiled, hashtags lit up, one side cried foul, the other demanded blood. The tension inside the DOJ only mirrored the tension outside. In closed door sessions, voices clashed. Some wanted to move forward boldly, to prove that even the powerful could fall. Others warned of political fallout, of careers ending in disgrace, of retaliation from the Oval Office itself. Do you want to be the one official muttered, who brings the president's wrath on this building? The agents who had risked everything felt the shift. The air was no longer filled with determination, but with dread. Their reports vanished into bureaucratic silence. Their questions met with vague answers. It's being reviewed. It's under consideration. These things take time. The excuses piled up, each one heavier than the last. And beyond the corridors of power, Homan carried on as though nothing had happened. He appeared on television, blasting immigrants, touting his service, sneering at critics. His swagger only grew, his confidence unshaken, as though he knew something the public didn't. Maybe he did. The storm raged louder, the evidence sat heavier, and the agents waited for the justice they had fought so hard to secure. But in Washington, storms don't always end in rain. Sometimes they end in silence. And then, just as the truth was about to surface, the case was killed.